All right. Welcome to the Hodgepodge Podcast. I am here with a country music legend. She is she has celebrated 53 years as of September 16th as a member of the Grand Ole Opry. Her new single, "Not a Dry Eye in the House," featuring Willie Nelson, is available now, and her new album, an American classic, is available now. I know this lady through my grandma, and that's kind of how I know who my guest is for today. She is also the host of Sundays with Seely on Sirius XM Willie's Roadhouse. Please welcome my guest, Jeannie Seely. Thank you, Jeannie, for joining me. I really do appreciate you having me.
Well, thank you for inviting me aboard, and that is wonderful to know that your grandmother taught you who I am.
She played me. I remember it was a few years ago, and she had played me. And she had asked. She said, "I'm going to play you some of the music I grew up on." And I said, "Okay, sure." And she played me "Don't Touch Me," and then played me "Harper Valley PTA." And it was by a lady named Jeannie Seely, and I was like, "Wow." You know, it was great, and yeah, I jumped on the chance. I had the chance to interview, and I jumped on it. So I'm really glad you did this.
Well, I thank you so much. Yeah, just "Don't Touch Me" was my very first album. Of course, Harper Valley was it by Jeannie C. Riley, and there was a lot of confusion on our names. But we both did record that. She had the hit on her, but back then, when you did an album, it was the trend to record other hits that were going on at the time. So I did end up recording it, but we joked through the years, our names are so similar, and one time her mother said, "I just claim them both, it's easier." So that's always been kind of funny. She's retired now, moved back to Texas and kind of retired.
Yes, ma'am. And you mentioned the trend back in the day was to record other people's songs, and that it's kind of like for me the most familiar artist to do that is like Elvis Presley. Elvis Presley would record everybody's other song, and you would just think it was Elvis's song just because he would put it on there, and he was like the most listened to artist back in the day. And it's nuts to think that when you go back and you're like, wow, Elvis is not the original singer of that song. It's actually, Johnny Cash or whoever.
Right. He had a way, too, of once he sang something, he made it his own. I never got to meet him. I always regretted. Two artists that I wish I could have met was Elvis Presley and Patsy Cline. I didn't get to meet either of them.
Well, you did get to meet one legend, and you're friends with this legend, Willie Nelson. So, and I'm kind of nerding out here because I am a giant Willie fan. I'm actually reading his book for like the third time, and it's amazing to me because the guy seems like such like an authentic type of guy. So, talk to me real quick, and we'll go back into your childhood and stuff here in a second. Talk about your friendship with Willie Nelson. How did you come upon meeting him?
Well, I met Willie when I was living in L.A. I was went to work for a record company because I wanted to make a record someday and didn't have a clue how you did that. So I thought, well, go to work at a record company, and that's the way to learn. And I would volunteer to go to the recording studios to do anything they needed, from making coffee to run and get sandwiches to I took shorthand and I would take down the lyrics sometimes for them and go type them up. Whatever. Anyway, Willie was recording for Liberty Records at that time and did the album, and then I wrote. So I first met him in the studio. He wouldn't remember me at that point. But then later on, I rented him office space. He was supposed to be in charge of a West Coast publishing office. And so that's when I first really got to know Willie. And that was 1963. We've been friends ever since then. And I was talking to him, I thanked him publicly on a Sirius XM town hall meeting we did recently, that he's just kind of been there whenever I needed a hand up, he always seemed to be there. So he's just been a great friend through the years, and I am so thrilled to have him not only sing on this new album of mine, but to have Trigger play a part on it too.
Yeah, and you also were in his film Honeysuckle Rose. So, and you've done more films since then. What was it like doing a film for the first time?
Well, I'll tell you what, there's not very glamorous till it gets to the screen. There's a lot of long hours waiting and redoing, and it was hot and dusty and everything, but of course all the crew and the other artists and actors made it fun. But, it's tough working under those conditions. A lot of people just see the glamorous side, but making movies is a lot of work.
So was it easier to spend long out, even though you're used to spending long hours in the studio recording music, was it easier, which is easier, spending long hours on a set of a movie or spending long hours in the studio? Because you're using your voice both ways there,
Yeah, the studio is much easier. It's not nowhere near as long a time, and the good thing is you're in either heat or air conditioning. Doing movies, you're not always doing that, but I've enjoyed all the things that I have done.
Mm-hmm. So take me to July 6th, 1940 in Titusville, Pennsylvania, which is the day you were born. Take me back a little bit and paint me a picture here. What was it like growing up in Pennsylvania versus, making your move to Nashville?
Well, growing up in the country, I don't find that much difference between the North and the South. A lot of people say, you're from Pennsylvania, how did you get into country music? Mm. Well, that's all I ever knew. I was born in small town in Titusville and grew up out in the country. And our little farm bordered the Pennsylvania State Game Reserve land, so it was pretty rural up in there, a lot of, miles behind our little farm. But, from a very early age, I remember country music. That's what my parents listened to. Saturday nights were set aside for listening to the Grand Ole Opry, and no matter what else was going on, we listened to the Grand Ole Opry. So I loved it. I remember early on. And of course, that was during World War II and 44, 45 is my earliest memories of Ernest Tubbs. And then later on, little Jimmy Dickens, and I love little Jimmy Dickens. Mm-hmm.
I reading.
Knew I'm sorry.
No,
I was
you're
just
okay.
going to say I knew at 8 years old what I wanted to do and where I wanted to do it. And I've been very fortunate to be able to see that dream come true.
Well, was it... I'm going to go back in the day because you mentioned when you were 8, you realized what you wanted to do, and that was sing country music, and you wanted to sing it on the Opry stage. Now in the day of 2020, a lot of kids don't know what they want to do in life. They either go to college 4 different times and change their majors. Was it normal back in the day for you to know what you wanted to do at an early age, or is it kind of like it is now, where it's like, okay, I don't know what I'm going to do, but I have to do something?
I don't know. I don't think everybody knew back then. It was just something that from an early age, I was in a little school program in 3rd grade and sang a song, and I don't think I even sang it by myself, as I recall. But I saw the kids laughing and smiling and heard them applauding, the parents and the other kids, and I thought, this is just great. I just love it. And so that was my goal. When I did my first radio show when I was 11. And then I really did know that's what I wanted to do. So It's just been, and of course, I knew that I had to figure out a way to make a living until I could sing, full time.
Yes.
So that's when I took all the commercial courses in school and learned typing and shorthand. And then when I went to work for a bank when I got out of school, couldn't afford college, but I found out they had free courses in the evening at American Institute of Banking. So I took, it was either 7 or 9 courses there that I took. And all of that has helped me in my career because then it taught me how to understand contracts and also how to manage your money.
Right. And I think that's kind of what a lot of artists now, or even school, they don't teach how to balance a checkbook or how to manage your money. And I do think that's one thing that kids even my age, at the young age of 22, we kind of know how to do it a little bit, but we don't need. And I think that's one thing that's interesting to me is you went out and you wanted to learn how to do all this stuff when there's younger kids in this generation where they're like, yeah, it's gonna come to me or it's not,
Yeah. And there are so many opportunities today, and I try to encourage young people, and they say, I haven't thought about it yet. And I said, well, start thinking about it and think about what you really love to do, what really interests you, because I encourage people to have a passion. Because there's an old saying, find something you love to do and you'll never work a day in your life, because it doesn't seem like work when you love what you're doing. So I like to encourage young people to figure that out as early as they possibly can. Just go with what interests you. That's where your heart is.
Absolutely. And it's kind of like, I'm going to go on the same roundabout that you went. It's kind of, it's not work if you love what you're doing and you're doing what you love, but it's also if you do what you're doing without making any money and you still grind it out every day. Imagine what it's going to be like the day you start making money on what you love to do.
Oh yes, when you finally start getting paid to do what you would do anyway, that's success, and I don't care what level it is. And I also encourage people to look at the different aspects of success. It's not only what you want to do for a living, but what do you want out of life? I mean, some people are so career driven that they miss the family. They miss the children growing up. So, it's just, there's different ways to look at what success. In my mind, I always wanted to do what I love for a living, but I didn't want it to control my life so much that I couldn't go out in public or that I couldn't enjoy my own time, with family and friends. Mm-hmm. That's so important to me, too.
Mm-hmm. I was watching a couple of interviews here a couple of days ago, trying to get ready for this podcast and trying to kind of learn the days back then. And I was reading Johnny Cash's book, and he was talking about how when they were sitting around the radio listening to the news was only from 8:30 to 8:32. And then now you look at the news, and sometimes news goes on for 90 minutes, and most of the days it's on all day long. And so I wonder, what have you seen from 1944, you said was your earliest memory, to 2020, and it's just been the biggest whirlwind, kind of you lose your breath and you're like, wow, I can't believe how different it is, which I imagine it's a lot, but.
Yeah, it's tremendously different. And of course, I come from an age when you listen to the news, you heard the news. You did not hear bias,
right.
And that's what I miss. I miss hearing what's the truth. And I think it's a disservice to our whole generation that too often we're hearing someone else's opinion, not what's actually happening.
Right. So take me back to 1966, the the day you learned that "Don't Touch Me" was on the road to being one of your biggest songs, because that was your first song you ever put out. And so what was the feeling once you learned the first song you put out was going to be a major hit?
Well, it wasn't actually my first record. I did have
Okay.
a couple of singles on Challenge Records before that did local,
Okay.
local success, but nothing on the national level. Yeah, it was tremendously exciting to hear and watch my record going up in the national chart. But I was on the road with Porter Wagner at the time, and I remember they would call me and tell me where my record was moving up to and how exciting it was. But my constant question was, did Mr. Divine call from the Grand Ole Opry? Because I wanted to hit record, but I also wanted to become a member of the Grand Ole Opry. And he was the manager at the time. So we finally, Hal Smith, who was the agency I was working through at the time, finally said, okay, the last time I took an artist to the Opry, they didn't stick with it. And he said, but you seem so, certain in your mind that's where you want to be. I'm going to break my rule, and I'm going to call Mr. Divine and tell him how much you want to be a part of it as soon as there's a way, if they would consider you. So he called back immediately and said, absolutely, we want her to join the Opry. So that was, all of that was all mixed together for me, that I was thrilled about the number one record, but I was also thrilled to be a part of the Grand Ole Opry, which was my life dream.
Mm-hmm. So were you there when Porter Wagner introduced Dolly Parton to the Porter Wagner Show?
What do you mean by there?
Like were you? Yeah, because you mentioned just a second ago that you were on the road with Porter Wagner. Were you there on the show once when he introduced Dolly Parton to the crowd?
No, Dolly came after me. I think there were a couple of other female artists between Dolly and me.
Okay.
I followed Norma Jean in, and there was a time period where Norma and I were both on the show. And I appreciated Porter giving me that opportunity. That was my first gig, in Nashville. And but there were so many, as my record hit, there were so many opportunities for me to do on my own. I couldn't do both.
Right.
So it was bittersweet for me to have to leave Porter's show, but it was something that I had to do.
Mm-hmm. So I want to flash back to today, and then we'll go back in time if you're okay with that. So on July 6th, which was your 80th birthday, happy late birthday, by the way, you released...
Thank you. I'm still celebrating, so you can't miss my birthday.
Let me tell you, if I get to 80 years old, you better bet your butt that I'm not going to stop celebrating making it 80 years, 8 decades. So
yeah, making records, 6 of them, I guess.
So on your 80th birthday, you released the song with Willie Nelson called "Not a Dry Eye in the House," and I'm going to play that here in the beginning of the podcast, so in the later editing stages of the podcast. So talk about "Not a Dry Eye in the House," and how did you go to Willie and asked him to write to sing this song with you, or was it kind of just a no-brainer you had to have him on it?
Well, we had talked to and lined up the songs and the different guest artists we wanted to have on the album and which songs, and I just about had that all done. And one evening after dinner, I was cleaning up the kitchen, and all of a sudden it hit me, and I told my husband, I said, I'm on Willie's Roadhouse, been friends with him since 1963, and I didn't think to invite Willie to be a part of this album project, and I'm so proud of, because you mentioned, 80th birthday, who gets a Curb Records recording contract and an album and a duet with Willie Nelson for her 80th birthday? It's just phenomenal. So anyway, I threw the dish towel down and went straight to the phone and called Buddy Cannon, who is Willie's current producer, to see if it could even be possible. I mean, contractually, if they would do it. I thought it would. And he said, absolutely. He said, let me give Willie a call. He said, I know he's going to want to do it. It's just a matter of how and when. So he had me send the track to him, and then he sent it to the engineer that travels with Willie. He said he will do it. It might be in Austin in the studio, might be out at his ranch or in Hawaii. Who knows where he'll do it, but he will do it. So, of course, this was during the lockdown stage, too, where we couldn't be together. So, no, actually, that's not right. Take that out, because it wasn't before that. It was after that we had to do everything by Zoom. So, but anyway, Willie did do the track at his ranch outside of Austin.
So you published an autobiography or a memoir of your life called Pieces of a Puzzled Mind. I'm writing a book right now, kind of the same thing, kind of like a / self-help book. It is a pain in the neck to write a book. So did you find it tough to write it? And would you write another one if the offer came to you?
Well, let me correct you there. That's not what Pieces of a Puzzled Mind is. Okay. I'm starting to work on my autobiography now. Pieces of a Puzzled Mind is just a little thought, what I call a thought book. For years, I would have these different thoughts about what was going on in my life. Some of them just kind of sarcastic. Some of them writing away disappointments and hurt. Some things I just thought were funny. And I'd write them down and throw them in a shoebox. And it was after I sold my tour bus and was off of the road. The first project I did was pull that box out and go through and put them all in this little book. And it's just a thing to make people laugh. And also I put pictures in there, and they go, the puzzle pieces on the pictures go from my baby picture with the big child-like puzzle pieces to smaller ones as we go through, meaning we get more intricate as we get to be adults. It's just kind of a fun book. It says, Pieces of a Puzzled Mind. You can't judge a book by its author. It's just meant to be fun and give you something to think about. I know Jim Ed Brown told me one time, he said, I thought I had known you for years. I didn't know you at all until I read this little book. And he said, I can see some of them that you laugh when you first read it, but then you realize how bad you were hurting at the time that you used humor to overcome it. So it's just a fun book. It's still available on my website, and it's fun thing. Dottie West called them Seelyism.
So you said you're writing your autobiography or putting it together now. How is the process going? Like, is it kind of hard? Because I imagine you've done 6 decades worth of music. Is it hard to go back and just piece each part together? Like, oh, I absolutely have to have this in the book, and then once you remember that, you're like, oh, well, there was another part over here I'd like to add as well.
Yeah, we're in the process right now as I remember things or somebody reminds me of something. I'm making notes on it. I'm going to write it with my friend Roxanne Atwood. Her husband, Tim, was the keyboard player at the Opry for 38 years. We've been friends for 40-something years. Roxanne and I worked together back in the old TNN days. So anyway, and Tim and I do a lot of concerts now with just he and I and the baby grand piano. So we spend a lot of time together, so that's going to make it easier. But they've just been recording a new album on Tim, and of course I've recorded this one and doing all the promotions. So everything's on hold right now, except when we think of things, we make notes. I'm gonna, of course, tell the story of my life, but the bad times, I'm just gonna state them as facts to move on, because I want more fun things in this book.
Right. Which all publishers kind of do at a certain point. They kind of want you to break the third wall, and it's just like, that's kind of how it's putting people on blast if you're breaking the third wall.
Well, I appreciate fans and interest and all, but every single thing in my life is not everybody's business.
Right, exactly.
So, yeah. I just want it to be, I want to share mostly the fun things. You have to share a little bit of the bad times so you can appreciate the good.
As we kind of wind down here, in 2010, I want to talk about your home. It was destroyed in the 2010 Tennessee floods. Kind of take me back to that day. Is it still kind of emotional to think about that your home was, washed away and destroyed?
Well, it is, but as with most bad times, there's always an upside from it. We did, of course, my home, this was a little retirement cottage that I found back in 1990. And it was uninhabitable at the time. It had been kind of deserted, but I loved the view and loved where it was. And so it was easier to rebuild after the flood than a lot of the big houses. So we did rebuild it, and the upside is I was able to fix the mistakes that I made the first time that I remodeled it. And I did unique things the first time, like I had a ball doing it. I stopped salvage places and found really unique windows and doors and things. But the second time around, when I replaced them, I went for energy efficient instead of unique,
Right.
So it is, the house is much more energy efficient and secure than it was before, and things for convenience. So, but it was very devastating at the time. You're standing here, you just can't even imagine what all it entails and what has to be thrown away. The sad thing, I guess the saddest thing about it is the memorabilia that I lost. Some things that are irreplaceable. Like, I wrote a letter to Dolly Parton from my puppy dog at the time, Shadpoke was his name, about building a place for puppy dogs at Dollywood.
Right.
Because when I'd be down there, I'd see people with dogs left in the car or walking them around in that hot pavement, and it was just sad. And I thought they need a nice kennel for people to put their dogs in. So I had my little dog write Dolly a letter suggesting they build Doggywood, which they did. And Dolly wrote a nice letter back to Shadpoke, and of course those two letters were gone in the flood. At one point, they still have that framed in the lobby at Doggywood. I've got to find out if that's still there.
Well, that's interesting.
Those are the kind of things that you just hate to lose.
Right. And it's kind of interesting that your dog wrote a letter to Dolly Parton, and she actually accepted it and actually built Doggywood. And because I haven't been to Dollywood in a long time, so it's been years upon years. But when you lose something that valuable, you at least have to be thankful that, that sure, those are gone, but you have more. You weren't in the damage there. You were safe. Your family was safe.
Oh, absolutely. There was such devastation here, and some people weren't able to rebuild. Some people lost their lives. So, yeah, I mean, it's nothing I know how blessed I was, and I'm happy too that I learned a lesson too. We all keep things that we don't need, and so it's taught me to, if I don't use this anymore, look around. Somebody really does need it or can use it. So it's opened my eyes, and I was able to help some people after the tornado that went through here too. So that's always a good thing. You learn by everything that happens to you, the good and the bad.
Mm-hmm. So on September 16th, you celebrate 53 years as being a Grand Ole Opry member. Take me back and try and kind of talk me up about the first time they ever asked you to become a member of the Grand Ole Opry. What was that feeling? Because coming from an 8-year-old girl that knew what she wanted to do to now being 53 years ago, finally being a member and coming and setting your goal, what was that feeling, the emotion coming through?
Well, I think that every emotion you can possibly feel happened when I was first invited to the Opry. I was on as a guest one time first, and then, when I became a member, I was absolutely thrilled. But the first time you step on that Grand Ole Opry stage, there's a little bit of terror in the back of your mind too, and nerves, but everybody feels that. There's no other stage in the world quite like the Grand Ole Opry and the meaning that it holds. And even, like I'm glad that I got to join the Opry at the Ryman Auditorium too. So now I have two special places, because by the time I can be off the road and be at the Opry more, we were at the Opry House. So it's more like home to me than the Ryman, but I still treasure the Ryman. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was just exciting, it was scary, and it was rewarding, and I cried tears of absolute joy.
Well, Jeannie, you can catch her new album, An American Classic, available right now. Go get her new song, a duet with Willie Nelson called Not a Dry Eye in the House. Catch Sundays with Seely on Sirius XM on Willie's Roadhouse. Thanks for doing this for me, Jeannie.
Well, thank you, Dylan, for inviting me, and let me publicly thank all the wonderful friends of mine. They are tremendous artists in their own right, and for them to take some time to make my album special for me, I can't say thanks enough. I love Lauren Morgan. Bill Anderson is just one of my closest friends. Steve Warner, and of course, I thank Dallas Wayne for the wonderful song and Not a Dry Eye in the House. So, anyway, we're very proud of it, and I hope everybody will give it a listen and hopefully enjoy it.